information contained in this podcast is an expression of opinion and does not constitute investment advice. This is the Gold Money Podcast with Andy Duncan, keeping you up to date with expert opinion on precious metals and the markets.
Welcome to this Gold Money podcast on Tuesday, January the 15th. Today I'm speaking to Nigel Farage, MEP for the South East of England in the European Parliament, leader of the UK Independence Party and co-chair of the Europe of Freedom and Democracy Group. Hello, Nigel.
Good afternoon.
Last week, Mr Barroso told us that the euro crisis was over. What's your opinion on what Mr Barroso said?
Well, who do you think you were kidding, Mr Barroso? You've got to hand it to these guys. They just refuse at every level to accept there is anything wrong with their project. The facts are, if you just look at some of the basic economic factors, look at the increase in unemployment, look at the downturn in growth. Look at what's happening to manufacturing industry in Europe. And this isn't just the Mediterranean. I'm talking about France too. The fact is that what Draghi did was he sent a signal to the markets, very much backed up by Angela Merkel, that they're not going to let Greece or Spain or Portugal go in the short term. That has frightened the markets off for the moment. They've gone away to play games elsewhere. And so whilst the immediate financial markets crisis may have gone away, certainly until after the German elections. The last thing the Germans want is for all of their potential losses to become realised losses. The reality is that the Eurozone isn't working. And actually, we're getting to a point now where the Eurozone's not working for anybody. The problems haven't gone away. And the one thing I would flag is that socially and in human terms, the problems are getting worse and worse and worse. You read now, for example, of Portugal, where schools were even opening over Christmas to feed kids who frankly just weren't being fed at home, so bad is the poverty. In Greece now, we've got a crisis with the colder weather, that people in schools can't even afford heating oil. The whole thing's desperate. And when you've got youth unemployment rates nearing 60% in some of these Eurozone countries, and where the prognosis for 2013 is that it's actually going to get worse. Frankly, I think that Mr Barroso's highly paid, chauffeur-driven, caviar-fueled lifestyle, based in Brussels and Strasbourg, I'm afraid that what he says, frankly, it's almost like a Marie Antoinette moment, isn't it? He just shows how completely detached he is from the sufferings of tens of millions of people in Europe.
Now, you just mentioned France there, but on King World News last week, you sort of intimated that you thought the focus might move to Spain. Do you still think the focus, the next kind of crisis area, will be Spain again?
Yeah, I do, because I think that behind the Spanish problem, of course, is an even bigger problem, which is the sheer size and scale of the Spanish banking problem. And that is something that if that begins to unravel, it'll be difficult for Europe on its own to fix. They'll need their mates in the IMF and elsewhere, one suspects, if we get to that stage. So, yes, I do think Spain is where we should perhaps be focusing for 2013, with also growing political and social instability in that country as well. Longer term, I still hold the view that ultimately France and Germany cannot survive together inside the same economic and monetary union. And that's why I believe in the end, basically the whole thing will fall to bits, other than perhaps just Germany and a few of those Benelux countries. And then the question wouldn't so much be economic, because none of us from the start ever doubted that they did constitute an optimal currency zone in purely economic terms. But then the question becomes political. Do little countries want to become part of effectively what would be a greater Deutschmark zone? I haven't changed one little bit my view that the Euro project will break up, and it'll break up very dramatically. But what I did about 6 months ago was I revised my view and said that I'd underestimated the sheer fanaticism, the sheer levels to which the Germans and the European institutions were prepared to go to stave off the inevitable. And I now begin to think that perhaps what the Eurozone is headed for is up to a decade of decline and misery.
Just like the kind of Japanese situation, I suppose. Now, speaking of Germany, your colleague Godfrey Bloom is very much a believer in a separate Deutschmark and even possibly a a golden Deutschmark. Now, we just saw reported yesterday in the publication Handelsblatt that the German Bundesbank has completely reversed its position and is now going to repatriate all 3,000 tonnes of the gold held abroad. Do you think this signals a new lack of trust between central banks in Europe? And could it actually mean a move by the Germans towards a Deutschmark?
Well, I think that it certainly signals a lack of trust and confidence, I think perhaps is the word here. And it shows that Germany, being a very sensible country in many ways, has always got a contingency. I mean, whenever I ask the question in the chamber here, I ask Barroso or when he can be bothered to turn up, my old mate Van Rompuy. And I've repeatedly asked them over the last couple of years, what is plan B? Surely, gentlemen, it would be highly irresponsible not to have a plan B. But it's become clear to me as time's gone on that genuinely they don't have a plan B. But I'm pretty certain the Germans do have a plan B. And I would have thought that the repatriation of gold was a part of that. Whether they're actually thinking of moving to a gold-backed Deutschmark, I simply don't know.
By a happy accident, Britain managed somehow, I don't know how actually, to avoid being dragged into the euro. What's your outlook then for the British pound sterling area and the British economy as Mr Draghi drags the eurozone down into a chaotic pit of unlimited money printing?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I think the industrial news from the UK this week was fascinating. We get Honda announced that it's going to lay off 800 workers in Swindon, people who are manufacturing cars for export into the European market. And then a few days later, we get Jaguar announce, and they, of course, who are busy selling cars to China and India, that they're actually going to increase their workforce by 800 people and increase production. And that little story, I think, tells you everything you need to know about the future direction in which this world is going, and why, whilst the United Kingdom must regard Europe as an important marketplace, and after all, it still is 38% of our overseas trade, it highlights to me, firstly, the importance of us not being stuck in the single market customs union and having the trade deals and to pursue a global future. And there are some signs of optimism. There are some British businesses that, despite our government not really understanding how they operate, there is evidence that there are some good things that are going on within the UK economy. However, we still have this enormous debt burden problem overhanging us. So I'm not short-term particularly bullish for the pound sterling, but then as somebody that believes in floating currencies, I'm not that worried about it either.
Now, we've seen some outside political interference from the United States government to stop Britain leaving the EU, and we'll probably get some horribly fudged speech from Mr Cameron on Friday, because the political elite have long loved the EU. But what's your kind of betting that Britain might actually head towards getting out of the EU within, say, 5 or 10 years?
Well, I'll tell you what, the very fact that a British Prime Minister is giving a speech on this subject, and however fudged it may be, the fact that even he's going to be discussing the possibility of the exit route, and he may say it's a mistake and it's wrong, but the fact that a British Prime Minister in what is effectively a global speech is talking about even the possibility of Britain leaving says to me that UKIP has done a lot to drag the agenda in the right direction. Now, clearly, his aim is to attempt to deflect this as a political issue at the next general election. He saw Blair, who he admires, of course, totally, and he saw Blair do this to brilliant effect in 2001. It didn't matter how much Haig screamed, 10 days to save the pound and all the rest of it. In the minds of the voters, the issue had been boxed off because Mr Blair had promised a referendum on the issue before taking us in. And in those days, electors believed what prime ministers said. Now, I suspect what we're going to get from Cameron is, as you've said, we will renegotiate. We must stay part of the single market. We won't be joining a even deeper political union. And we'll then put that to the British people in 2018 in a referendum. And of course, I'm going to say, why do we need to wait 5 years? I'm going to say, how much more damage is that to the British economy? I'm going to say, why should we pay more, £70 billion more as membership fees? I'm going to ask the question, how many Bulgarians and Romanians will come to Britain in the intervening time, many of whom possibly not just to work, but to claim social security? I would ask all of those questions, but there's a bigger question that I'm going to ask, and it's this. Why should we trust him? Why should we believe him? We've been here before. This is the man that won the Euro elections in 2009 on the back of this cast iron guarantee that if he became Prime Minister, he would give us a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty. I'm afraid, I'm sorry, I genuinely don't trust this bloke. Now, he, of course, could prove me wrong. There are two things that he could do. One is he could surprise us all and say we're going to have an in-out referendum before the next general election. And if he does that, well, I'll cheer him to the rafters. The second thing that he could do is he could prove that actually he was serious about renegotiation and that it wasn't merely an act of window dressing. And he can do that by invoking Article 50 of that Lisbon Treaty that he refused to give us a vote on. And that's the only mechanism that exists within the European Union treaties where you sit down around a table and you are bound to negotiate powers back to a member state. If he invokes Article 50, I would at least take that seriously. But you know what? I doubt it.
I think you're right. I doubt that as well. It seems to have disappeared down the memory hole, doesn't it? His promise that was all over the front of newspapers before the previous election.
Yeah.
Now, one terrible thing about Britain leaving the EU, that I can't think of many terrible things, but one terrible thing is we won't get to see you on any more YouTube videos anymore. Now, tomorrow, Mr Barroso is going to be speaking. Are you going to be making one of your famous speeches tomorrow? And if you are, what can we look forward to? Well, you can't give it all away,
no.
But can we look forward to seeing a good speech from you tomorrow?
Oh, I don't know. I'll do my best is all I can promise you. Yeah, I'll be in that debate. And I'll be pointing out that Barroso's complacency in the face of the human suffering that is taking place in the Mediterranean says to me that we really do have now the kind of political elite in charge of Europe who become increasingly reminiscent of the Soviets, telling everybody about record harvests at a time that people were starving. Something along those lines.
OK, I look forward to that. And another one I'm looking forward to is Monsieur Hollande is going to the Parliament as well in February. Now, the question I want you to ask him is, are you going to ask him about Gerard Depardieu's defection to Russia?
No, I don't think that Gerard Depardieu these days is a very good role model or example to be held up for anything. So, no, I'm going to steer well clear of that. But I might have a chat with Mr Hollande about hate taxes and what they do to skilled and talented people within a country. And not so much a Gerard Depardieu's, but in many cases it'll be people in their late 20s, inventors, entrepreneurs, successful people who will flee from Paris. And I think you can expect me to have a little conversation with Monsieur Hollande on that subject. And I'm very much looking forward to him coming to the European Parliament. And I'm sure I'm looking forward to it very much more than he is.
Oh, that should be good. I'm really looking forward to that one. Back in the early 2000s, Gordon Brown sold off most of the British government's gold. In retrospect, how bad a decision do you think that was?
Utterly cretinous. Not just that he called the market wrong. We're all capable, by the way, of calling markets wrong. But it was the very fact that he advertised the 17 dates and the quantities that he was going to sell, and the market said, thank you, come to daddy. And if you look at the long-term historical gold charts over the last 100 years, and you see the ups and downs, and you see in this period, 98 to 9, this depression in the gold price, which is now known by long-term gold chartists as the brown bottom. We'll leave it there. But I must say, what I found extraordinary was that in the House of Commons, the so-called Conservative opposition never, ever challenged him on this point. And I think we saw the Conservative Party collectively lose its confidence in itself. It stopped arguing about gold sales. It stopped arguing about the ratcheting up of UK public spending. And we now have a Conservative government who, in very many ways, yes, I know they're in coalition, but in many, many ways, frankly, I've said it before, I'll say it again, you really can't put a cigarette paper between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party in modern Britain. And given how much of our life, particularly our economic activity and our business life, is now decided by European laws and European institutions, all we do at general elections is we vote for a change of management, not for a change of government. And what UKIP are trying desperately to do is to give the British people a free and fair referendum so that we can reverse that.
Now, this management is taking us, it seems, down into chaos because they think they can print money to make us all wealthy. Just as a final question, how long do you think it's going to take before this kind of government-induced chaos finally breaks the EU apart?
I just don't know the answer to that. That this whole thing is untenable. and cannot hang together, that Western governments cannot just go on printing money in the way that they are without it causing inflation, that at some point in time, we're going to see interest rates rise, which will make servicing the sheer size of these national debts just a nightmare, not just for us, but perhaps for generations to come. That all these things will happen, I am certain. If I knew the timing, I tell you what, I wouldn't be talking to you. I'd be down at Ladbrokes.
Fair enough. Okay, I'm looking forward to your speech tomorrow with Mr Barroso. So thank you very much for your time today. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Subscribe to the Gold Money newsletter at www.goldmoney.com to receive email updates on new articles, videos, and iTunes podcasts from our Gold Research section.